Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming. We are continuing in Chapter 2, and we're on page 47, way at the bottom. When Jory speaks about his struggles with common sense activities, part of that challenge comes from his larger issues with language. Here he explains his thoughts on why basic directions often don't make sense to him and do not achieve their desired result. Jory: one reason why I'm bad at common sense things is because my brain operates weirdly in the sense that it goes in various directions, which could be very helpful for more complex things like thinking about systems, but is very bad for, like, how to screw in something. I think it's helpful to explain in terms of ideas. Some people think that an idea is a real thing, but I don't treat any ideas as real in the sense that they're just little things that toss around in my head. I also don't line them up. It seems to me that most people think in a very linear way, like there's an idea, there's an opposite, and there's a line in between them. But why is it a line? People seem to think that making their thoughts or ideas more complex is all about making their linear systems more linear. They define their idea carefully and define its opposite just as carefully. And then there's a linear equation which connects them. And then multiple ideas intersect with each other to make a system of ideas. But I just throw my ideas in all sorts of directions until it's almost like there's no direction anymore. Visually, it looks like trucking in a load of ideas, dumping it, and seeing what happens. That process is what makes my mind terrible with doing things simply or quickly or efficiently. This is why I do not excel at linear directions, even simple ones. I almost have to think through them more, which is ironic. Usually, I try to organize the things I need to do first versus second because of deadlines. But Mom will tell you that I'm not very good at that system because a lot of things get jumbled around, especially because I have a terrible habit of automatically deciding relative importance. My brain will just kind of shred things without my noticing. Like, I remember the first bit of Mom's instructions of what she wanted me to do, and the last bit, but not the middle. It's like, because my thinking is much less structured, then applying structure is harder. I think this makes it harder to explain my thoughts as well. Sometimes I can't find the right word. LW. A significant part of school, work, and even life revolves around following directions. How have you adapted to that? Or have you? Jory. Some people may look at where I am now and assume that I have adapted to that I have adapted to the exterior world surrounding me, whether it's school, work, or something else. But I haven't really. Living in a linear world will always warp my mind into a shape that it doesn't belong in. I was fortunate because, in the beginning, being homeschooled meant my education was adapted to me. If the suggested assignment was a word search, I was incapable of doing that. I still can't today, and Mom would simply replace it with something else. Having that freedom to learn in my own way gave me an ability to manage later in academic environments that were not built for the way my mind works. For instance, by the time I was in group science labs in college, I had the role of doing math calculations or double checking group work rather than pipetting, which I am terrible at because of my limited fine motor skills. I could compensate for someone else's possible weaknesses, and they could compensate for mine. I've taught myself to take notes, but things like due dates have never been my strong suit. And it really helps if I have a variety of ways to access directions. There are always going to be differences. The point is to find ways to build positive experiences and to combine strengths. Talking about autism specifically, what if your child is diagnosed with autism? Jory was very upfront about sharing his thoughts regarding an autism diagnosis. Our conversation also included the topics of emotions, labels, and feedback, and Jory's understanding that many neurotypical people experience feedback and emotions very differently from him. LW. What would you say to a parent whose child has just been given the diagnosis of being on the autistic spectrum? Jory. At the danger of sounding really cold, I don't think there should be too much of an emotional reaction, because I see emotions as generally unhelpful, and this is probably an instance where emotions are unhelpful, which I know is not what people want to hear, so I probably wouldn't say it to someone's face. In this scenario, with a diagnosis of autism, I would hope that as things get more normalized and the family becomes more familiar with autism and has more context for autism, that their first reaction maybe wouldn't be that negative, and certainly not negative about the child in particular. Recognizing that there's a lot of uncertainty about the future, wondering what they will need to learn to be a good parent, things like uneasiness or confusion, those types of negative emotions are fine. That element of change is mixed in with, like, yeah, I'll have to change as well. But others, if it changes your view of the child, for instance, are probably unhelpful. If it's a nuanced and balanced emotional approach to this new situation, then that's fine. But a lot of times, people's emotions are not terribly complex and nuanced. People say, "This all flew out of my mouth before I had time to think about it." From their perspective, they can't control what they feel. Although maybe some people can. In Buddhism, control of the self, removal of the self, is a huge thing. Some people can to varying extents, but that's different than the way I think about it, in terms of just removing it. But it's possible to acknowledge someone's response without agreeing with the response. I would acknowledge any response, but then I would be most concerned to make sure it's not negative, such as, "Now I think my kid is less," whatever less means. I also feel labels are particularly unhelpful because labels get you to think about so many other things which may not have happened yet. If all you have heard about autism are horror stories, then that's going to be what you think about. Maybe you have fear, and you will probably think, this is going to be me. I find that hard to understand because the child, who that child is, has not changed after receiving a diagnosis. From my understanding, raising a kid is really difficult regardless of whether or not they have autism. It was already going to be a pretty rough go. I'm very uncertain about ever having kids. I do appreciate kids. Their questions are very direct, and they are smarter than many adults think they are. I also love working with kids, and I'm particularly interested in children's education issues, not necessarily because they're easy, but because I think they are important. But I've seen enough to know that raising kids in any circumstances is a really challenging thing to do. Emotional responses. One of Jory's more extended discussions of other people's propensity to give emotional responses was embedded in our conversation about an autism diagnosis and what he would say to a parent of a newly identified autistic child. A particular resonance is his distinction between what people need to hear and what they want to hear. Jory. I know there is a lot of value in responding to people in a positive way, even if it's not what I think. For me, it's also really hard to distinguish what people need to hear from what they want to hear. Because emotions play into that so much, the correct answer might not be what they need to hear because of the emotional element. Oh, excuse me, that was supposed to be 2 sentences. There's a period after the word much, and I read it as a comma. Continuing on. If you give somebody who is emotionally invested in a problem a critique, it's shocking to me that their response to the critique is almost always negative. Because if you told me there's a better way to do things, I would love to hear it. Because that means I can do it the better way next time. And if it's not clearly a better way, then I'll go back and forth with you as to why you think it's a better way and why my way was worse. I would not have an emotional response beyond being slightly disappointed. I put some time and effort into it, but I'm not emotionally invested. But for a lot of people, you have to think about how to give feedback. Bosses have to think about how to give feedback in a constructive way. But what's constructive isn't always going to be the most helpful, which is confusing to me. Because you'd think that in situations where emotions were not helpful or where they clouded judgment, people could just snap them off. But that's not really how things work. LW. Any thoughts about therapies designed for autism based on your experiences? Jory. With regard to parents and various types of therapy, it's really challenging for anyone to say you should do this, but you shouldn't do this. Mom tried lots of things, and for me, certain therapies were effective, even if I did not enjoy them. But others didn't help. I did not respond well to them, and it was clear that I wasn't going to respond well to them after repeated attempts. For someone else, the balance of effective versus ineffective types of therapy or experiences might be different. I think parents would be well served with getting a variety of information and to try things out. And there's the bit about balancing the needs of the family. LW. What are some of the broad misconceptions or generalizations that you see about autism? Jory. I think there are two kinds of misconceptions that I tend to see. A lot of people don't understand that autism affects individuals in different ways. They might assume, based on their friend or a friend's friend who has a kid with autism, that all autistic people have significant mental challenges. I think many neurotypical people tend not to be aware of those people with autism who are contributing at different levels in society. I feel as if there are quite a number of people in the workplace who have autism but may not have had it officially diagnosed or choose not to share it with others. I don't really know or understand very well the differences in how autism affects people. A lot of that is because I don't understand people in general. Some smart medical researchers may actually figure out reasons for some of these differences. What I do notice from my own informal sampling over the years is that in different contexts, when I've met many people on the spectrum, they all think differently from me, just as one neurotypical person may think differently than another. The other misconception that I see a lot is the stereotype of people with autism being super socially awkward and doing strange things, having trouble with conversations, being emotionally challenged. There was a Netflix show called Atypical about a kid with autism who's trying to find love or something like that. I didn't think it was a very good portrayal of autism because it focused too much on common stereotypes. You could tell they had done research to develop the character, but it came off as somebody who had researched and found all the characteristics of autism, and then the actor just amplified all of them, which is not really how autism works. For me, I have those things, but at different times and different amounts. Mom and I also found it hilarious that they seemed to miss one key thing. The whole setup of the show is that this person is trying so hard to make romantic connections, and they didn't even fully seem to question the fact that maybe an autistic person isn't super up for that in the first place. For me, I've been on a few dates, but compared to other people, especially my age, I feel like it's a lot lower on the priority list for me in terms of needing or wanting a romantic connection. That Netflix show took a person's struggle and had all the stereotypes of autism causing problems, where, because of these stereotypes, the lead actor couldn't seem to do what other people did. Just focusing on the outward characteristics is a surface-level approach, and it leads to more generalizations, in effect saying, all autistic people are like this. Autism is far more than a collection of outward differences. In fact, the one thing that I've noticed about autism, and I don't feel like I can describe it very well, is there are just so many individual differences at a deeper level. Some of those broader characteristics do apply in vast generalities to people with autism, but in different ways or different amounts and in different environments. There's a lot of complexity that makes it difficult to try to pin down anything. The one blanket statement that I can make about autism is that there is no blanket statement to be made about autism. LW. You don't like being called a role model for autism. Why is that? Jory. I feel like autism is on a spectrum for a reason. In my mind, at least, there's a wide variety of types and levels of impact on people with it. I've been asked questions like, what do you think about being a role model for autism? One, I don't think role models are always a good idea because everybody is unique and everybody can be their own leader. Two, each person on the spectrum is different. Not every autistic person is going to excel academically, just like not every person is going to excel academically. Just like not every person is going to excel academically. It's in no way a negative statement, it's just a recognition of the huge variety of types and levels of impact. Different people excel at different things. It adds another layer of reasons why you shouldn't make generalizations. And that's the end of chapter 2.